Okay, welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling a topic that, well, it might not be grabbing headlines every single day, but looking through the sources you've shared with us, it's clearly got some real weight and surprising depth.
Hmm.
We're taking a deep dive into the relationship between India and Mozambique.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one.
You've given us quite a stack of material here. We've got articles, research notes, official readouts. Seems like it covers everything from, wow, centuries of connection right up to modern day cooperation on really vital issues like energy, security,
Food, even.
and even, yes, what might end up on your dinner table. So our mission, like always, is to try and slice through all this information, pull out the most important nuggets, the really key stuff,
Right.
and give you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about this specific, and I think crucial, bilateral relationship. Get ready, because honestly, there are some unexpected turns in this story.
That's absolutely right. Looking at this collection of sources, you immediately see it's not, a simple story. It's not just two countries talking about one or two things. It's much more like a complex tapestry. You've got these historical threads, strategic needs, very practical requirements. And this deep dive, I think, is about understanding how all these seemingly separate pieces, like a shared history under colonial rule, which is fascinating in itself.
Right.
And then vital maritime security cooperation, massive investments in natural gas, even agreements on food supply, how they all connect, how they form this, well, robust and evolving partnership.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. What is it that truly defines this relationship between India and Mozambique? What drives it? We're going to explore that, pulling insights directly from the material you've given us.
Yeah.
And I think to really get the present, we absolutely have to start by digging into the past. Because the history here is, well, it's pretty extraordinary, isn't it?
It really is. Quite unique.
When you think about India's historical links with African nations, you often think about, shared colonial experiences, maybe fighting for independence together, the non-aligned movement.
Usual narratives, yeah.
Exactly. But the source material here, it reveals this connection with Mozambique that's way more specific and, frankly, kind of unique. It highlights this surprising fact that Mozambique, while it was a Portuguese colony, was actually, for a really significant chunk of time, administered directly from India.
Yeah, that's the kicker.
The source says it explicitly.
Yeah.
From 1752 onwards, for about 200 years, Portugal ruled Mozambique from its administrative center in Goa.
And that detail about Goa being the administrative hub, it's much more than just a historical trivial pursuit question.
Right.
It actually created this direct bridge. Okay, it was a colonial era bridge,
Yeah.
but still an administrative and even human bridge between these two places that are geographically pretty far apart. Think about it, the officials, the merchants, maybe even migrants who must have traveled between Goa and Mozambique during those 2 centuries.
Yeah, you can imagine.
So while the whole context was obviously imperial control, this setup established these channels of interaction, maybe even some level of, I don't know, cultural exchange or at least familiarity that just wouldn't have existed otherwise.
Yeah, interesting.
It's like this foundational layer to the relationship that actually predates modern diplomatic ties. It gives it a unique historical footprint, very different from many other India-Africa connections.
So you have this really long period, 2 centuries, where a part of India was, in this strange twist of colonial history, effectively running Mozambique.
In a way, yeah.
Then fast forward, the tide turns against colonialism, and Mozambique starts its own fight for liberation. The sources mention the formation of Frelimo.
The Front of Liberation of Mozambique.
Right, in 1962.
Yeah.
And that marks the start of their armed struggle against Portuguese rule.
And during that really crucial period, India's stance was, well, pretty clear, according to these sources. The material emphasizes that India has always had cordial relations with Mozambique, and those relations have only gotten stronger over time.
Okay, cordial relations. What does that likely mean in that context?
Well, think about it. India had just gained its own independence relatively recently. Supporting anti-colonial movements around the world was absolutely a cornerstone of its foreign policy. It was a matter of principle.
No, it's solidarity.
Exactly. So cordial relations in that context probably meant more than just being polite diplomatically. It likely translated into, vocal political support for Frelimo in international forums like the UN, putting diplomatic pressure on Portugal, and possibly even some material or at least moral assistance to the liberation movement itself.
Okay.
This shared fight, this anti-colonial struggle, it created this bond of solidarity, mutual respect, and that carried forward really powerfully after Mozambique gained independence, laying the groundwork for a relationship built on, trust and shared values.
So you've got this foundation. It's built on this peculiar administrative link from centuries ago, then followed by this period of genuine solidarity during the independence fight.
Yeah.
How did that historical friendship then morph into a very practical, very strategic cooperation that seems to define the relationship today?
Well, that's the transition, isn't it?
Yeah, and that bridge seems to take us directly to one of the key areas the source material really highlights, defense and maritime diplomacy.
Absolutely key. The sources are very explicit about this. They call defense and maritime cooperation one of the most important areas of collaboration.
Right up there with trade and energy.
Exactly. And it makes immediate sense when you just look at a map, doesn't it? Mozambique has this enormous coastline.
Huge, yeah.
Over 2,700 kilometers, stretching along the southeastern edge of Africa. And that coast borders the Mozambique Channel,
Which is a major choke point.
a vital choke point in the Indian Ocean. And the Indian Ocean itself is this superhighway for a massive amount of global trade, including, crucially, a huge chunk of India's own critical imports and exports, especially things like oil and gas.
Okay, so the strategic logic is pretty clear there.
It's crystal clear. The Indian Ocean isn't just, a convenient route. It's an economic lifeline for India and many other nations. So security in this ocean is absolutely paramount.
And for Mozambique.
Well, for Mozambique, securing that long coastline is fundamental. It's about national sovereignty, protecting its exclusive economic zone, from things like illegal fishing, and also just ensuring the safety of shipping, which is vital for its own ports and its economy. And the source material, it specifically points to the threat of maritime piracy as a key shared concern.
Right, linking Mozambique and India's trade.
Exactly. Piracy, whether it's off Somalia or elsewhere in the wider Indian Ocean, it directly threatens those sea lanes that both countries absolutely depend on for trade and for energy flows. So, securing these waters, it's a shared strategic imperative. It benefits both of them directly.
And the source material, it gives us some really concrete, quite early examples of India stepping up to help Mozambique with exactly this challenge.
Yeah.
Way back in 2003.
Yeah, I saw that.
At Mozambique's direct request, India actually dispatched naval ships to provide maritime security right off the coast of the capital, Maputo.
And importantly, this wasn't just an isolated incident, was it? The sources note that later that same year, 2003, and then again in 2004, India sent naval ships again.
Right, for specific events.
Exactly. At Mozambique's request to provide security during these high-profile international gatherings. The African Union Summit and a meeting of the World Economic Forum, both held in Mozambique.
That's significant. What does that tell us?
Well, these early deployments are highly significant, I think. First, they show that Mozambique, even back then, already saw India as a trusted security partner, someone capable of providing real, tangible help.
Okay.
And from India's perspective, it demonstrated its willingness and also its growing capability to project naval power and contribute to regional security in really key parts of the Indian Ocean. It was a concrete step in its broader maritime strategy.
So this is defense diplomacy in action.
Precisely. It's the practical application of it, using your naval presence, your military cooperation, not just for purely military aims, but to build political trust, to strengthen bilateral ties, and, subtly shape the strategic environment in your favor.
The sources even name some of the specific Indian naval ships that have become sort of regular visitors to Mozambican ports and waters. They mention INS Ranjit, INS Delhi, INS Deepak, and INS Teg.
Yeah, listing the ships.
It makes it much more tangible, doesn't it? It's not just this abstract idea of naval cooperation. It's these actual steel hulls, sailing those waters, doing joint activities, building that familiarity, and crucially, trust between the two navies.
Absolutely. And the relationship didn't just stay at the level of those initial sort of ad hoc requests. It evolved into more formalized cooperation. The source highlights some key agreements that really deepened this engagement.
Like the MOU in 2011.
Exactly. In 2011, they signed a Memorandum of Understanding, an MU, specifically on maritime patrolling. And that was followed up pretty quickly in 2012 with an agreement for joint anti-piracy patrolling.
Okay, so formalizing it. What does joint patrolling actually mean in practice?
Well, these formal agreements, they move things beyond just responding to specific requests. They establish a framework for ongoing coordinated efforts. Joint patrolling basically means the navies of both countries conducting operations together in specific areas.
Sharing the workload, sharing intelligence.
Exactly. Sharing intelligence, deterring threats together, and enhancing their combined ability to secure the waters. It actually requires a pretty significant level of trust and standardization of procedures between the two navies to work effectively.
And clearly, this strategic focus on maritime security and defense, it's remained a top priority, hasn't it? The sources point out that during the visit of Mozambique's president to India in 2015,
Newsi's visit, yeah.
a key outcome was agreeing to further enhance this naval cooperation and also conduct more hydrographic surveys.
Hydrographic surveys.
Why are those so important?
Well, hydrographic surveys are crucial for basically mapping everything underwater, the seabed terrain, water depth, currents, tides. Accurate charts are fundamental for safe navigation,
Right.
especially for large vessels, whether they're commercial ships or naval ships. So, agreeing to collaborate on this, it shows a commitment that goes beyond just patrolling. It's about improving the fundamental conditions for maritime activity itself.
Facilitating trade and security at a basic level.
Precisely. It underscores the long-term nature and the expanding scope of this security partnership. They're not just reacting to threats, they're proactively improving the maritime environment.
And the source material makes a really strong point about how India sees Mozambique in its wider strategic picture here. It explicitly calls Mozambique one of India's 4 most important partners in the ocean economy.
Yeah, that term ocean economy is significant. It really broadens the scope beyond just traditional defense, doesn't it?
It does. What does it encompass?
It covers basically all economic activities related to the ocean. So you're talking fisheries, shipping, port development, marine resource extraction like oil and gas, which we'll get to, and potentially even things like marine tourism.
Right.
So designating Mozambique as a key partner in this really vital economic sphere, it highlights just how multifaceted the relationship is. Security cooperation isn't happening in isolation. It's about creating a safe and stable environment for economic activity that benefits both countries.
Right. So we've traced these historical roots, seen how that shared history fueled solidarity, and then how that evolved into this critical cooperation on maritime security, defending those vital sea lanes, supporting this growing ocean economy. Now, let's shift focus a bit from securing the waters to harnessing the immense resources that actually lie beneath them.
Yes, the energy dimension.
Exactly. The source material labels this area commercial and oil diplomacy. And this is where we see maybe the most significant economic drivers of the relationship today. And it was largely kicked off by one major discovery in Mozambique.
Absolutely. That pivotal moment was the discovery of truly vast natural gas reserves off the coast of Mozambique back in 2011. Specifically in the Rovuma Basin.
And the reaction was huge, right?
Oh, massive. The sources note that analysts looked at this discovery with immense optimism. They were expecting it to completely transform the economy of Mozambique, give it this much-needed thrust.
Understandable.
For a developing nation like Mozambique, finding something on this scale held the potential for huge revenue generation, attracting significant foreign investment, and potentially restructuring its entire economic future. It was, and frankly still is, a potential game changer for them.
And this is where India's strategic interests just align powerfully with Mozambique's newfound potential. The source material is very clear. A lot of Indian firms are already doing business in Mozambique in the hydrocarbon sector.
Makes perfect sense. India is one of the world's largest energy consumers, and its demand is growing incredibly fast.
Constantly growing, yeah.
So securing long-term, reliable sources of energy is a fundamental challenge for India. It's a top national priority. Mozambique's gas discovery presented this major opportunity to diversify India's energy imports, moving away maybe from some traditional sources.
And the sources talk about India's plans for this gas, right? Specifically LNG.
Yes, they detail India's pretty ambitious plans. For the period leading up to 2019 and looking beyond, India was planning significant investments, and the primary focus was on converting the natural gas they'd extract into liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
Well, why is liquefying it so important? The source says easier to transport.
Exactly. It's a crucial step, but it's also complex and very expensive. Natural gas, in its normal gaseous state, is incredibly difficult and costly to transport over long distances, especially across oceans.
Right, you can't just put it in a regular tanker.
No. But if you chill it down to about minus 162 degrees Celsius, that's minus 260 Fahrenheit, it turns into a liquid. And when it liquefies, its volume shrinks by about 600 times.
Wow.
which makes it, as the source says, easier to transport using specially designed LNG tankers. But, and this is the key part, it requires huge, sophisticated infrastructure, these massive liquefaction plants to actually make that transformation happen.
And India was prepared to invest in that.
Oh, absolutely. India's commitment wasn't just talk. The source gives concrete examples of the scale of Indian investment. India's state-owned ONGC Videsh Limited, OVL.
That's their overseas arm, right?
That's right. It's India's main vehicle for acquiring oil and gas assets abroad, specifically to boost national energy security. OVL made substantial purchases in that Ravuma field.
Okay.
First, OVL bought a 10% stake from an Indian firm, Videocon, which had gotten in early on the discovery. But even more significantly, OVL also bought another 10% stake in the very same field from a major U.S. energy company, Anadarko Petron Corporation.
So that gave them a pretty big piece of the pie.
A very significant cumulative stake, yes. It really highlights India's deep strategic commitment to getting access to this resource. They put serious money down.
And the goal was ultimately to bring that gas back to India.
That's stated explicitly in the source. India is planning to export the LNG and bring the same to India. This is a direct play for energy security, pure and simple. By investing upstream, meaning in the production and the liquefaction of the gas right there in Mozambique, India, is essentially securing a portion of those reserves for its own use.
Diversifying their supply.
Diversifying its supply chain, exactly. And potentially getting more favorable terms compared to just buying LNG on the open, often volatile spot market. It's like building a direct pipeline, okay, a virtual one using tankers, but a direct line from a source where it actually owns a stake right back home to meet India's massive energy demand.
What's also interesting, though, is that the source mentions this energy partnership wasn't only about fossil fuels. It notes the MOU also prioritized R&D and tech transfer in renewable energy.
Yeah, specifically mentioning solar, wind, and geothermal.
That seems important, doesn't it? A bit forward-looking.
I think it's a critical nuance, actually. While the immediate, massive strategic priority for India is clearly securing traditional energy sources like natural gas to power its current economic growth,
Right.
including renewables collaboration points to a more, well, forward-looking dimension of the partnership. It acknowledges the global energy transition that's underway.
And positions them both to cooperate.
Exactly. It positions both countries to cooperate on developing clean energy technologies down the line. For Mozambique, it offers potential access to Indian expertise, maybe investment, in developing its own significant renewable energy potential, sun, wind, which contributes to its sustainable development goals. So it looks like a more balanced approach, trying to address both the immediate energy needs and the future energy landscapes.
The source also mentions something about a joint working group, focused on defense cooperation, but also infrastructure creation.
Yes, that links things together again, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, think about it. Building all the necessary infrastructure for extracting, liquefying, and exporting that natural gas.
Huge projects.
Massive projects. Or even just improving port facilities for general trade. All of that often requires a secure environment to happen smoothly. So this joint working group focusing on both defense and infrastructure creation suggests they recognize that the economic goals and the security goals are intertwined.
You need one for the other.
You really do. It implies they need a coordinated approach to achieve both.
Okay, so we've covered the history, the Maritime Security Partnership, the strategic energy and commercial ties, the huge gas investments, the renewables cooperation. A really good way to see how all these different layers get reinforced and maybe pushed forward is by looking at the high-level state visits between the two countries. The source material analyzes these in some detail. Let's start with the visit of Mozambique's president, Filipe Jacinto Nyusi, to India in August 2015.
Right, Nyusi's visit.
And there's this fantastic detail about President Nyusi himself in the source. It really underscores an existing personal connection. He's actually an alumnus of the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, Ahmedabad.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah. He studied there back in 2003, did a 4-month management development program. I mean, how often do you find a sitting head of state who actually got part of their higher education in the country they're visiting officially?
That's genuinely unique, and it speaks volumes, doesn't it, about the kind of informal ties that can exist beneath the surface of formal diplomacy?
Absolutely.
It likely provides a certain personal rapport, a familiarity right at the very top level of government, and the source notes that during that 2015 visit, President Nyusi actually went back to IM Ahmedabad.
He did.
Yeah, and he addressed a conference there. The title was Make Africa Your Partner. So he leveraged his personal connection, his alumni status, to speak directly to this audience of Indian business leaders, academics, actively promoting investment opportunities in East Africa, obviously with Mozambique front and center. It just highlights how these human connections can be directly used for diplomatic and economic goals.
The source also lists some other interesting stops Nussi made during that trip. Adds a bit more flavor to the visit's aims. He visited the Arvind Limited plant in Santej.
A textile company.
Yeah, a major textile and apparel manufacturer. So that suggests maybe an interest in exploring industrial collaboration, perhaps in the textile sector.
Okay.
And he also visited the Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, which was Mahatma Gandhi's former residence.
Ah, that's highly symbolic.
Very symbolic, right? It connects with India's whole history of nonviolent struggle, nation building. It adds this cultural, almost philosophical dimension to the state visit, taking it beyond just the hard economics or security talks.
And as we touched on earlier, this visit wasn't just about symbolism or personal connections. It produced concrete agreements. The source explicitly states that Marinosin on new and renewable energy cooperation were signed during Nussi's visit.
Right, we mentioned that.
Along with that agreement to enhance naval cooperation and do more hydrographic surveys. So it shows how these high-level meetings serve as the platform to actually finalize and announce cooperation across different sectors, stuff that's likely been negotiated at lower levels beforehand.
Okay, so that was Nussi's visit to India. Then India's prime minister reciprocated. He visited Mozambique in July 2016. And the source highlights a really specific, important detail about this trip.
What's that?
It began his 5-day tour of 4 African nations. He started in Mozambique.
Ah, first stop. That's always significant in diplomacy.
Exactly. Starting the tour in Mozambique sends a pretty clear signal about the importance India places on this particular bilateral relationship within its broader Africa strategy.
Definitely. The sequence of visits on a multi-stop tour is never accidental. Making Mozambique the first stop absolutely underscored its perceived importance as a key partner. And the language the Indian PM used during the visit, which is quoted in the source, it reinforces that. He described Mozambique not just as, a friendly country, but as India's trusted friend and a reliable partner.
Strong words.
Very strong words in diplomatic language. That kind of phrasing signals a deep level of comfort, confidence, and frankly, strategic alignment between the two governments.
And the source details several key outcomes and discussion points from the PM's visit. Some touch on areas we've already covered, but some introduce new aspects too.
Like what?
Well, there was a commitment of assistance in public health ventures. That acknowledges a crucial area for development cooperation.
Important.
And that was backed up by an assurance from India about supplying essential medicines, which plays to India's strength as a major pharmaceutical producer, the pharmacy of the world idea.
Yeah, public health capacity building, access to affordable medicines, those are vital development areas. And India does have considerable expertise and resources it can share there. So that commitment shows a partnership extending into really crucial social sectors, too.
The defense cooperation we discussed earlier, that was also a key point again, reinforcing its ongoing importance. The source notes, a decision was made to enhance defense training and development.
Building on existing ties.
Exactly. Building on the fact that India was apparently already providing some training to Mozambican forces. So this suggests they agreed to expand or deepen those existing military-to-military links.
And that ties right back into the maritime security story, doesn't it? The source explicitly says, because Mozambique is coastal, facing threats like piracy, and given India's growing trade in the region, both nations agreed during the PM's visit to cooperate further on maritime security and protecting those sea lanes in the Indian Ocean.
So reinforcing the shared threat assessment.
Absolutely. Reiterating it and committing to joint action again, but this time solidifying it right at the highest political level during the PM's visit.
And the hydrocarbon cooperation, the gas field, India's energy goals, that was also clearly on the agenda.
Yes, the source mentions an envisaged agreement on hydrocarbon cooperation, which directly follows up on those huge investments by OVL and the plans for LNG we talked about earlier.
Right.
And the source provides really crucial context here for why Mozambique looms so large in India's energy calculations. It notes that After the global giants like Qatar and Australia, Mozambique was emerging as potentially the third largest natural gas exporter in the world.
Third largest. That's huge.
Staggering potential. And it just underscores the strategic rationale behind ONGC Videche's heavy investments. Mozambique isn't just a source of gas, it was seen as potentially a major global source. That makes India's partnership and investment there incredibly significant for its long-term energy security strategy.
Okay, but maybe one of the most, I don't know, tangible outcomes, something that people in India might have actually felt the impact of, that was the agreement on pulse supply.
Ah, yes, the pulses. That's fascinating.
The source gives the background, which is really important for understanding the situation in India at the time. There had been severe droughts in India in 2014 and 2015.
Right, affecting agriculture badly.
Exactly. It significantly hit domestic pulse production. And pulses are a staple food, a primary protein source for millions of Indians. So you had this classic economic squeeze. Demand was high, supply was way down.
And prices shot up.
Prices for essential foods like lentils and peas went through the roof.
And this shows how something seemingly distant, like international relations with Mozambique, can directly impact your grocery bill in Delhi or Mumbai.
Precisely. The source points out that specific types of pulses vital to the Indian diet tour, which is also called arhar, or pigeon peas, are grown in Mozambique.
Okay.
So the Prime Minister's visit managed to secure a long-term contract for pulses import from Mozambique. And this wasn't just a one-off emergency purchase.
No, it's strategic.
It was designed as a strategic, long-term supply arrangement. The idea was to help build up India's buffer stock of pulses, diversify where it was getting them from, and critically help stabilize those domestic prices for this essential commodity. It was directly addressing a vulnerability the droughts had exposed.
And the details of the agreement are quite specific in the source, aren't they?
They are. It shows real commitment from both sides. India apparently committed to encouraging Mozambique in pigeon peas cultivation.
Meaning helping them grow more.
Yeah, possibly providing technical help, maybe better seeds, other support, to help Mozambican farmers specifically increase their production of the variety India needed.
Okay.
The imports were planned to happen through both government agencies and private channels, suggesting sort of a multi-pronged approach to get the logistics and trade working smoothly.
Yeah, it's long term.
The initial contract period was set for 5 years. That gives some certainty for farmers in Mozambique to plan and predictability of supply for India. And the quantities mentioned are substantial.
How much?
Starting with 100,000 tons in the 2016-17 financial year, with a plan to double that volume to 200,000 tons by 2020-21.
Wow, that's a lot of pulses.
It's a huge amount of food. It represents this really critical link between Mozambican agriculture and Indian food security.
That pulse agreement really is a fantastic example of a win-win situation coming out of this relationship, isn't it?
How so?
Well, for India, it's clearly a strategic move. Enhances food security, reduces reliance on potentially unpredictable domestic harvests or other global suppliers, helps manage inflation for a basic necessity. Big wins.
Right. And for Mozambique.
For Mozambique, it provides a guaranteed long-term market for a key agricultural product that stimulates investment in their rural sector, encourages farmers to grow these specific crops because they know they have a buyer. It promotes agricultural development. It's economic cooperation directly tied to feeding people and boosting farming capacity. Really practical stuff.
Beyond these formal deals and economic ties, the source also mentions the sort of human connections that were part of the PM's visit, too. He apparently met with Mozambican students who'd studied in India.
Ah, the education link again?
Yeah, specifically at places like the Science and Technology Park in Malana. And he also met with members of the Indian diaspora who live and work in Mozambique.
And those interactions are important, too. They highlight the people-to-people links that really underpin the state-to-state relationship.
How do they help?
Well, education is a powerful connector. Mozambican students who come back home after studying in India, just like President Nyusi himself, in a way, they become this valuable bridge of understanding, of familiarity between the two countries.
Right.
And the Indian diaspora living in Mozambique, they're often involved in local businesses, community activities. They also play a crucial role as this living link, contributing to Mozambique's economy while fostering cultural exchange. Diplomacy isn't just about governments signing papers. It's built on all these layers of human connection as well.
Wow. Okay. So we've really taken this deep dive now. We started with those incredibly deep, kind of unexpected historical roots being ruled from Goa.
Amazing.
Moved through that shared solidarity in the fight for independence, Then into this really critical security cooperation on the seas, driven by clear mutual strategic interests. Then the massive strategic investments in energy resources, the gas that could potentially transform both economies.
Huge potential.
And then right down to the very practical level of securing the supply of essential food, like pulses, to help feed India's population.
Yeah.
And all of this seems to be constantly reinforced and pushed forward through these high-level visits that finalize agreements, build trust, and nurture those human connections.
It really is a multi-layered relationship when you unpack it like this, isn't it? It's clearly driven by this alignment of mutual needs and strategic interests.
It's very pragmatic.
Very pragmatic. Security for those vital sea lanes that benefits both countries' trade and energy transport. Energy resources from Mozambique for India's huge and growing economy. Food security for India's large population. And from Mozambique, opportunities for economic development, agricultural growth, foreign investment.
Right.
And as the source material makes really clear, this robust, modern partnership is built firmly on that foundation of long-standing historical ties and shared experiences, even if those ties are sometimes overlooked.
There's even one more detail in the source about India's broader energy strategy that kind of puts the whole natural gas focus into a wider perspective. It notes that back in 2016, when global oil and gas prices were pretty volatile, falling actually,
I remember that period.
India took a proactive step. It apparently led negotiations to try and create an alliance of gas importers.
An importers club.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Aimed specifically at preventing price shocks and ensuring stable supplies for the big gas-consuming nations. And India's state-owned gas company, GOL, was supposedly taking a lead role in those talks.
Now, that detail is really insightful because it demonstrates that India's pursuit of these bilateral energy deals, like the huge investments in Mozambique's gas fields, it's not happening in isolation.
It's part of a bigger picture.
Exactly. These specific partnerships are integral pieces of a larger, quite sophisticated, and definitely forward-thinking strategy. A strategy to enhance India's overall position and security in the global energy markets, trying to manage risks like price volatility and securing diverse, reliable sources for its long-term energy needs.
So getting a big stake in Mozambique's gas helps that broader goal.
Absolutely. Securing a significant stake in an emerging major source like the Rovuma Basin directly supports the goals of that proposed importers alliance, seeking predictability and stability in both supply and price. It all fits together.
So wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you, the listener, who shared these sources with us?
Well, I think it means that the relationship between India and Mozambique is far richer, much more complex, and strategically way more important than you might have initially thought.
Definitely more than meets the eye initially.
Yeah. It's really a prime example of how all these seemingly different factors, those deep historical connections, shared strategic needs around security and trade, critical requirements like energy and food, and then targeted high-level diplomacy, how they all intertwine. They weave together to create this really dynamic, evolving partnership, and a partnership that has tangible impacts, right?
Yeah.
From global energy markets all the way down to domestic dinner tables. And what's really fascinating, I think, is tracing that whole journey we've discussed. From those administrative links centuries ago in Goa to the literal transfer of grain and gas across the Indian Ocean today.
It's quite a story.
It really illustrates how the past continues to inform the present, shaping who relies on whom for, well, everything from securing shipping lanes against pirates to ensuring a nation has enough pulses to eat. And digging into these sources, it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How will these deep, practical ties, built on this mix of mutual need and historical foundation, how will they continue to adapt and evolve, especially in the face of future global challenges?
Like what kind of challenges?
Well, things like the accelerating energy transition, how might that impact long-term demand for natural gas? Or the increasing impact of climate change on agriculture, how stable will food production and security be? There's always another layer, isn't there? Another connection to explore down the road.
Absolutely. And that feels like a good place to bring this particular deep dive into the India-Mozambique relationship to a close. Thank you so much for providing the source material that let us explore this really fascinating connection in such detail.
Yeah, great sources.
We really hope this has given you that valuable shortcut to understanding its complexities and its significance. Keep those interesting topics coming because, well, there's always more to uncover in the world.